Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. Welcome again to this. Hey, we still got the music on? Are we on yet? There we go. Welcome to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. Again, this is Dr. Martin Luther King Day show. And as you can see, Josiah here is holding up a copy of a newspaper, the Portland Observer. Back in 1983, we did a piece on, well, actually we did two pieces, i.e. highlighting the Dr. King era, if you will. And it was a real good piece. And so here's Josiah, and he's holding this piece, and he too is going to be part of this celebration because our focus is going to be on him, our future, education, okay? So that's going to be the show, and Josiah, I want to thank you very much. Did you want to say anything? You want to say anything? What do you want to say about Dr. King? Anything you'd like to say about Dr. King?
Happy Martin Luther King Happy Martin Luther King Day.
Happy Martin Luther King Day.
That's all right. All right. Thank you very much, Josiah. Okay. Now I'm going to let Josiah have a seat, and then he's going to sit up here and see what the grown-ups are going to talk about Dr. King in regards to his future. Okay? All right. Well, joining me today are two individuals, as far as I'm concerned, and notice that in the publication it says drum majors for peace. Well, you know, we're going to kind of change it a little bit. During that particular time, say drum majors for peace, but drum majors for the future, as it relates to education and the futures of our young people like Josiah and others. Well, on that particular backtrack, I've got Jaymes Winters. Jaymes, welcome aboard. Jaymes, you've seen Jaymes before. We'll get a little bit more about who Jaymes is and in his introduction in terms of his background and whatever, but I'm very excited about Jaymes being on the show, possibly a future host, too, here at Oregon Voters Digest. I think it's very important. We'll talk about that. And then, naturally, one of my favorite persons that I've been associated with for years and years and years, and I'm talking about Becky Black, in fact, better known as McCoy Academy, or if not that, Oregon Outreach. Oregon Outreach has many entities within that, and one of which is a major one, which is McCoy Academy, and if you're not familiar with McCoy Academy, you had both Bill and Gladys McCoy, and while they were very active, if you will, in the city of Portland, for the state of Oregon for that matter, they opted to focus, if you will, on putting together a charter school, and they were a major part in the development of Oregon Outreach. And Becky she's a promoter, she's a dishwasher, the whole nine yards, and her husband Cy was very, very much involved. I still say he's with us today, and I was on the board for a number of years, but the bottom line is that they basically opted to work with kids that were basically falling in the crack, and so it's very, very important that we have individuals like her. So again, here's another drum major, if you will, of our education system for those young people who need that kind of support. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Now, normally what we've been doing in the past is that the last year, as you know, Matt Hennessy from Vancouver Avenue Baptist Church did a piece, as he opened it up with and read the I Had a Dream, and he did an excellent job. In fact, Matt might be a part of the show, the second half of the show. If not, he will give us a call in and maybe sort of like do something from a ministry standpoint, talking to Dr. King at the end of the show. So be a part of that, and hopefully Matt will give us a call. Now, what we're going to do this time around is that in these historical issues that Joshua, right? Josiah was holding up, if you will, and forgive me, folks, getting at that point in life, but anyway, rather than do the I Have a Dream piece, I'm going to take an interview that was done in this particular copy back in 1983. One of the reporters interviewed Commissioner Charles Jordan. Remember Commissioner Charles Jordan? Well, anyway, Lanita Duke interviewed Commissioner Charles Jordan, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to read this interview. I'm going to bring us back to 1883, and during that particular time, before I get into this interview piece, during that particular time, Governor Vic Atiyeh was the governor of the state of Oregon. He was a Republican. The mayor of Portland at that point in time was Frank Ivancy, of all things. And naturally, Commissioner Jordan was one of the commissioners. He spent 2 terms, 1974 to 1984. Okay, and then the person who brought Commissioner Jordan to the state of Oregon, i.e. city of Portland. I say state of Oregon because he was well known throughout, and he was the first African American that was elected to the city of Portland. And I'm talking about Neil Goldsmith now. Neil Goldsmith was mayor from 1973 to 1979. But the bottom line is that Neil was a major contributor in terms of bringing Commissioner Jordan to town. And whether one recognizes it or not, I may have to indicate the fact that during that particular time, he was a major responsible for putting many African Americans, if you will, in government and even in the private sector. And even as I speak here at the cable access routine, it was Neil Goldsmith that basically, during his mayorship, that actually put the criteria together, that actually put together the community access television. He was the one that negotiated the deal with the major outlets, if you will, and so we may want to make sure that we give him that accolade. So with that, let me just go on with this interview. And again, this was by Lenita Duke at the time. She was president and owner and all of Grassroots News Northwest. And she, as you know, you might have known that during that particular time she was on KBOO. She had a show going on KBOO, and she was working in addition to that with the Portland Observer under Gloria Fisher. Gloria Fisher was basically, she was the mainstay. Sure, we owned the Portland Observer at that point in time, but Gloria was the one that basically put this piece together, and I was the guy that was responsible, besides being the publisher, to go out and get the ads and this, that, and the other to make this thing work, okay? So here it goes, Grassroots News, Lenita Duke. Among Portland Afro-American political leaders, Charles Jordan stands alone as a man who stood up for his convictions and paid a price, much like King, who stood up and was shot down. When I think about King, I am reminded of what he stood for. This was the courage, sacrifice, and suffering of struggling people. He spoke not only for black people, but disenfranchised people everywhere. He left the world with principles, and if these principles were followed today, it would be a much better world. He did make a difference and is making a difference today. Considering Dr. King meant so much to so many people, why did the system target King for destruction? Because Dr. King was making a difference, and anytime you stand up for a belief, you set yourself apart from the crowd. Jordan said, if King had lived through the 1980s, there is no telling what this world would be like. Dr. King stepped outside of the boundaries the system established for minorities. When that happens, the system knows how to put you in your place. With his death, the system is saying you can only go so far. You still will not achieve full freedom. Charles Jordan. It is unfortunate, but sometimes the system works through sick minds. Dr. King taught that you do not use violence and oppression to deal with violence and oppression. This tactic was working on the conscience of the world. He would not have been as powerful as he was if there were not television. He brought the plight of the black man in the South to every home in America. The system worked through sick minds to quiet the man, Dr. King. They could not afford to allow a man like that to move at the rate he was moving. Dr. King was making a difference. Charles Jordan. Again, Charles says, today we have the most complex communication system in the world. Where is the consciousness of the world? The consciousness of the world is wrapped up in economic problems. Now, the almighty dollar is the number one. People do not mind giving when things are going well, but now life is tougher and they are not so charitable. Does that remind you of today? Charles Jordan said this. It's every man for himself, and the moral consciousness of the world has fallen asleep. Will we ever have another like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., according to Charles? There are moral leaders out there. Throughout history, anytime God's people are facing a crisis, he sends them a Moses. His name may not be Moses, but Martin Luther King or one of your readers. I do not think we have reached that point where it is timely for the Lord to send one. But I know one will arise and stir the moral consciousness of the world. What does Martin Luther King mean to Charles Jordan? That was asked by Lenita. a role model. This man was arrested and brutalized, but he still kept on making a difference. He was one of the first role models I've ever had, Charles Jordan. And when you think about the Moses that he was talking about at that point in time, there was no sense that we'd have an African-American president. And now we have an African-American president who's a major contributor to ourselves. And so I was really appreciative of this article, and it really talks to where we are today and the stresses and whatever. So that's my that's the speech today. That's the message that Dr. King, I'm sure, would have, as far as I'm concerned, would have given in today's era. So again, thank you, Charles. And as you know, Charles is still with us and happened to be a neighbor of mine, and you know, he's made many contributions here in the city of Portland. When you think about when you're sitting out downtown Portland in Pioneer Square, it was Charles Jordan that put that piece together. And thank you, Charles. Okay, now let's go on with the show now, our other part of Dr. King's show. Why don't we start off with Becky, and Becky will give us sort of an overview of Oregon outreach and the McCoy Academy and what role does McCoy Academy plays in this area and its origin and the like. Becky.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for having me on today. I moved to Portland in '88, a few years after that article was written, and I've always worked with children, and I moved to Northeast Portland and moved in June and immediately went to work at the King Neighborhood Facility helping young people find jobs. I didn't work too long with young people before I realized that even then in 1988, the number of young people who had dropped out of school or who were thinking of dropping out of school was extremely high. And it really concerned me. I thought a job is important, but without an education, jobs can be a dead-end street. And I began researching the number of young people in our community who weren't in school. And eventually that led to me forming the McCoy Academy. And McCoy Academy was formed for young people who had already dropped out of school, but who wanted to return, but needed a setting that would help them not only with quality academics, but with other things that were going on in their lives. And since that time, we've worked with 15 different school districts, and right now have 3 private alternative schools. And my goal, I have to say, is education. I think that when Martin Luther King talked about the future and what had to happen, a lot of what he had hoped for and dreamed of has happened. I grew up in the South where there were separate drinking fountains, separate restrooms, back of the bus. From the time I was 3 years old, I knew it was wrong. And we've made progress thanks to Dr. King and all the other men and women who were part of the civil rights movement and who continue today. But one area where we still have so far to go is education. And without an education, there is no hope for our future. And without education, we worry about our young people. Right now, our jails are filled with young men of color, and our streets are filled with young people of color who aren't in school. And we know who these young people are. We know because we're kicking them out of our schools and we're getting rid of them. We know when we start seeing the problems. And that's the time we have to step up to the plate. We have to step up to the plate and realize that everyone deserves a quality education. And if a young person is suffering from poverty, from drug abuse, from abuse, violence in the home perhaps, whatever, or lack of being given the basics in academics, then it's up to us, the adults, to step in. And that's what my programs are for. I want to capture those young people that we are very close to losing or that we think we've already lost and bring them back into the fold and give them what they need to be successful, productive adults. And in our world, that includes a lot of things: housing, food, sometimes mental health assistance, counseling, and quality academics. And we have thousands of young people out there who are being overlooked, who are on the street because they have nowhere else to go. And so for 24 years, my little piece in our community is trying to capture and bring those young people back into the fold. And I think that was a part of the dream that we haven't helped fulfill, that we still have to work on, and that's giving a quality education and caring and concern and fulfilling the needs of our young people that right now are on the street, filling up the prisons, the juvenile detention facilities. What are we going to do about it? That piece of the dream hasn't been fulfilled.
Thank you, Becky. finance is a major, major factor. Jaymes, introduce yourself.
For the third time, Jaymes Winters from Blue Leopard Capital,
Okay.
private equity fund. I would say that from the business world standpoint, Becky's made some points that are well taken. When we were out looking at the future employment and the demographics, obviously the nation in this area is becoming much browner, and the education curve is not keeping up with the demographic curve. There's no dispute about that. Where there's probably a lack of consensus is how do you cure that problem? And it's not purely an Oregon problem or California, it's a nationwide problem of where resources are allocated. It seems to me that a lot of the resources are allocated after the problem has began and not before the problem starts. And just by way of example, as a longtime Portlander, I grew up in North and Northeast Portland, and after church at Hughes Memorial, we would go drive down Williams Avenue and head home. We would drive past McKinney Insurance. We would drive past Cash and Maxey's. We would drive past Hartley Oil. And all these were African-American owned businesses. And a lot of the problems that we're faced with today, I mean, they're quite honestly Latin to me. And even the rowdiest of all trouble causers, at least they finish high school. Because the support system, the financial support system within the community was generated by private businesses. And people didn't really look at the effect that once full integration took place, the effect that that was going to have on business, African Americans in particular, because we had always capitalized our own business with our own money. That type of thinking hasn't gone away. From a government standpoint, they still expect African Americans to do that with their own money, and it's very, very tough in this business environment to make a difference, to tell a kid that is in high school and grade school, hey, you can grow up, you need to go to college, 4-year college, finish school, and the kid's going to say, so I can own a flower shop or a single proprietor type of operation. And I think that if we're going to have that discussion, that definitely the resources of the community businesses need to be on the table, because I think that a lot of the money that the state of Oregon spends and other states is spent on a lot of social activities that are just putting like duct tape on a very, very leaky pipe, and they don't want to spend the money on the pipe itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, again, we're going to continue in this this part, but for the benefit of some of these young people out there that are looking for careers and what they're going to be doing in the future, why don't I just spend a couple of minutes on your background in terms of how you got to be where you are?
Well, my background started at home, and I was blessed to have both my parents for the plurality of my life, and I was blessed to have a system of discipline at the house, and I was also blessed to be in a community where maybe not everybody knew absolute right from absolute wrong, but there were some boundaries that people were unwilling to step out of. My dad was college educated. He got his master's degree. I drew some inspiration from that I wanted to go on and graduate to college myself. But if you come forward to today, I was recently at Oregon State, received a fellowship award from the School of Business, and my take on the African American students there currently was that they didn't have the sense of urgency that we had, and it could be because when we had just got down there, they had burned a cross on the Black Cultural Center lawn, and in most instances, the African American students said, if nothing else, we're walking out of here with a diploma. So maybe the game for us was a little bit different than it is today, but I see a lack of urgency on the part of this generation. Maybe it's generational, maybe it's just the way things are. And I think that the lack of urgency also cuts across to other races, not just African Americans too. Mm-hmm.
Good point. Now, let's talk about that. You made a point about the fact in terms of how you were supported by your family. You had both your mom and dad. Dad was very well educated, and that meant a lot to you in terms of basically your progress and where you are today. And however, and Becky, you just come right on this piece. But what about the kids that you are basically that are into your particular programs? And many of them, it has been said in many ways that babies are having babies, kids are having kids, and they don't have the same family kind of structure, if you will, and support system. How do you deal with that? And is that an issue in your program?
I think a couple of things, Bruce. One, I'm all for early intervention, and I think the earlier we intervene, the better. But also, I think it's important to realize that once a young person becomes a middle schooler or a high schooler, it's not too late. Lives can be turned around at 16 and 17 and 18. And the young people that we work with, there are many reasons. There are many young people who come from families that are really trying. There are young people who come from homes where there's just a mom. And I've heard from moms over and over again, I need help. Money is hard, it's hard to get by, and I can't get any help for my child until they're in trouble. And I think that says a lot, that we need to have help and assistance for young people when they start exhibiting problems and not wait until they've committed a crime. And I think things have changed, and I think the sense of urgency has changed. And in the days of Martin Luther King, when he made his "I Have a Dream" speech, the discrepancy between whites and blacks and people of color was so visible. There were people who they couldn't vote, and as I said before, they couldn't ride in the front of the bus. And there was a purpose. There was a purpose for fighting the good fight and for having a dream. Today, we still have the issues of poverty and the issues that go along with poverty. And unfortunately, we have people turning against people, young black men turning against young black men and brown men against young brown men. And the passion is there, but it's misplaced. And we know we can identify the young people in our schools when the problems start. We see the young people who come to school hungry or come to school with problems, and we need to start intervening then, long before they're in trouble or have a criminal record. We need to intervene then as a community. It's not just the schools, it's the parents, and it's the community, it's the churches, it's all of us. Instead, as a child gets into trouble, they're gradually pushed out of the system. Our schools need to remain safe. The student who's making it an unsafe place is going to be pushed out of the system into an alternative and eventually pushed out entirely. Meanwhile, until they commit a criminal act, what are we doing? Then suddenly kids are in gangs and they form their own family and they form their own community, and there's problems on the street, and we haven't intervened until then, and maybe then it is too late. We have to start earlier. We have to put our money, we have to put our investments, our dollars, our money where it can make a difference for our future. If we don't do that, attacking a problem once it's already a problem, instead of seeing the signs and addressing the issues early on, we're going to continue in the same way we're going. A family who's struggling can be a good family and still have problems with their children. And then there are the children who sleep in a different house every night, who don't have a home. There are a lot of children in our community who are hungry, and they're going to reach out. And if they don't have community, if they don't have those of us touching their lives with caring and concern, the real community, they'll form their own. And unfortunately, that's happening in a negative way.
Jaymes, in that same area, the criminal justice system, the way it's set today, here we're in a recessionary kind of a situation. Okay, folks get into that, they go down to the institution, all right, and then they do their time, and now they're being sent back to the area where they committed the crime, okay? And normally, what I understood was that in order to get out, you were supposed to have a place to stay and a job before you were able to get out. Now, we're sitting in a recessionary situation, so who's at the front of the line, so to speak? They have nowhere to go. And a person still has to feed their family. If they, a lot of times, many of them are fathers. They may not be living in the same place, or if not that, they are living in the same place. But how do they make a living? They've got to have the finance. Any response to something like that?
Well, kind of going back to what I said about stopping problems before they happen.
Yeah.
I think once, and I have a lot of friends, quite honestly, that are in the system, and for whatever reason, when they do get out, a lot of them fall into the trap that you just described. When the state is talking about allocating scarce resources, in a situation like this, a person comes out of prison, he has to have a place to stay, he has to have a job. That's a fair requirement for society, but the system has to be financially accountable for that. But as I said earlier, I don't believe that the system is being financially accountable in a bigger picture. You can't tell these kids at age 12 or 13 that they shouldn't sell drugs when they don't see the benefits of hard work sitting in front of them. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They don't say, shoot, I got to go to school for how many more years? I don't like it as it is, and all I'm going to get is a job as a government employee sitting in the corner, making about the same amount as I would, throwing crack around on the corner. So that's what has to get around. It's so huge, so huge. It was huge for me to see an image of a successful person of color, someone who had put all the work in, did what they were supposed to do. It gave me inspiration. It gave me the belief that I could do it myself. But when you don't see that, I mean, the streets are yelling at you. The streets are hollering at you, telling you, hey, man, it's all here for you. No hard work involved, very easy way to get in and make some quick money. That's school, grade school, elementary school, secondary school, college. We don't need that. You can get it all right now. And it's really difficult to tell a kid that this is the way to do it if we don't show or have a way to show that it's beneficial in the future.
Again, now another point I would bring up, and this again talking about our present educational system, supposedly the system that's being set up to date. The governor jumped in. Governor Kitzhaber has jumped in, and he's basically reorganized the whole beast and just making it very simple. He's basically saying, I'm the chairman of a new school board. Kind of in that kind of a vernacular aspect of it. I'm going to take charge of this thing. We've got to do something different, if you will. What do you think about that from what you've read or what you've heard about that? Becky, start off with you. What do you think about what he's doing?
I feel strong that our education system needs to change, that there are many things that need changed. And will the changes that our governor is proposing be enough? I don't know. What I have seen in the past is institutionalized racism within the education system, things that you can have good people working in a system that is a self-perpetuating bureaucracy, that it takes more than minor changes to really make a difference. Can what the governor is suggesting make a change in a system that needs a lot of changes, or will we just have some more committees and some more boards and spend some more time spinning our wheels? The evidence will be, will that achievement gap narrow? Will more students start graduating? It's barely over 60% all across the state that are now graduating. In Portland Public Schools, it's 50%. Is that going to change? That's going to be where we see. I can't predict if the changes that are being proposed. I believe there has to be changes. I frankly believe parents need to have some choices, and I think that there needs to be more support for schools that are outside the realm of the traditional public education, because we know one size doesn't fit all. And so it remains to be seen. I hope and pray that the changes that are being made in Salem right now, that they do make a difference. And ask me in 5 years, let's talk about, has that achievement gap gone away? Are our children of color getting the same education and the same opportunities as all children? Or are we still losing children of all colors to the streets?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a short break, and then when we get back, Jaymes, I'd like for you to jump in there, because the thing is that there's also a lack of communication, as I see it, from the standpoint of him educating the public at large, especially those kids or those families, if you will, about what is this going to do, if you will, to benefit my kid. Is it going to make him a better student? Is he going to be able to graduate and go to college? I mean, what is he going to do? Is he going to do a blue-collar deal or whatever? So when we get back, let's jump right into that discussion. Okay, we'll take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Let me know when my mic's down.
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
Welcome back again to the Oregon Voters Digest. This is our Dr. King show, and normally what we do here at the Oregon Voters Digest on Oregon Voters Digest is that we try to talk to something that would be of benefit to you, the viewing audience, and to our community across the board. Very important. We're very familiar with the presidential election that's going on right now. That's from a national perspective, maybe the state and whatever. But hey, we got to bring it home. We've got some things, we've got some issues we need to talk to. People are very interested in what can you do to better my way of life. And it's a very, very tough situation. And we've got kids here that I tell you, they are falling in the cracks. I mean, so rapidly it's pathetic. And as my guests here have said many times over, we got a criminal justice system that's constantly just housing these folks, nowhere to go, getting out, nowhere to go, recession, where do they get a job, back of the line. I mean, it's a tough situation. So anyway, thanks for joining us. If you've missed us, you know, you can pick us up on another show. And by the way, it's going to be on YouTube. So if you think that this is a show that needs to be shared with folks that you know that may not have Comcast. A lot of folks can't afford the media in many ways. Well, guess what? If you've got a laptop or you got a computer, you can access this show. So you can email the show to some of the folks that you know, and I would recommend that very, very, very much so. And by the way, I've got my guests here again. I've got Becky Black of Oregon Outreach, and again, more specifically, locally in the Northeast Portland area, McCoy Academy, and Mr. Jaymes Winters, who is an investor type of a business aspect of it. He's from the community. He's made it out the community. In fact, I knew his dad many times over. He was always in the education arena, always at the school board, always involved, trying to do as best he can what he could do, if you will, for the education of our young people. So again, I want to take my hat off to your dad too, and again to put him and make him, really, in all due respect, he really spent a lot of time in many areas for that matter.
Thank you very much.
Very much so. Okay, when we broke, we were talking about the whole idea of education and i.e. what John Kitzhaber, our present governor, was doing, i.e. trying to make a change, trying to make an impact, if you will, trying to focus, if you will, what to do. Now, we talked a little bit about are you getting the kind of information on the upfront side to kind of get a sense of what he wants to do and the direction he wants to go, and is it a good thing from what you've heard about what he's proposing?
It's fairly drastic, but I think that the governor ought to be given an opportunity to fail or succeed on his own terms. That's the marching orders of most elected officials. I think that everyone is tired of it. There haven't been very many successes in the prior system, and this seems as an aggressive shot across the bow. I think he ought to be given an opportunity to see if it succeeds. As far as our education system, I think that our education system is not all that bad. I mean, at the end of the day, a textbook is a textbook. Calculus is calculus, and it doesn't really change, from a black student to a white student. Now, what does change to me is that our hope and our belief that we can accomplish these things, it seems to be diminished somewhat in the black community. And I went to a gang summit that Commissioner Loretta Smith had, and it was so crowded I had to kind of stand outside, but I had an opportunity to talk to the kids. The kids were pretty smart. Like, yeah, to be gang members, quote unquote, anybody that has a perception that these kids don't have the intellect to go to college and make it are surely mistaken. Now, do they have the insight or the drive to go to college, or do they have a vision of that? That's where I believe the problem is. I think that in my alma mater, and I'm probably a little bit biased, I think Oregon State University has done an outstanding job. Especially when you compare it to when we were there. I thought that the powers to be there, they were trying to stop myself and my roommate Brian Inge and a few other African Americans who, when it appeared, and they weren't able to do that, but when it appeared that we were going to graduate from the School of Business, all of a sudden a lot of things came up, and I felt like there were staff, tenured staff in there that didn't want us to succeed, but that's completely done with and changed, and they actually do have a vested interest in seeing these students succeed. What's not happening is they're not getting the students that are qualified into the programs where they can graduate, where they can go out into the world of business and potentially start their own business, and then give something back to the community. And doing it that way, as opposed to having the government do it, it accomplishes two things. First of all, it lets us control our own destiny. And number two, it gives us a sense of pride of solving our own problems. Every time, I can't imagine how humbling it is to go to the state or go to the federal government on our knees virtually and ask for help for problems that we could potentially solve ourselves if we had our own sense of wealth. But since we don't, when we do go there, we get very little, and very little is expected in return.
And can I add to that? One of the things that's happening, I think, in the state that is right goes along with what you were just saying, that there is more of a focus, both locally and statewide, on post-secondary education. And there was a time in the late 80s and early 90s when I think a lot of us in education felt it was good enough to get kids into the school building and help them get to graduation and a diploma. Now there's a real move statewide, and I think in every district, to work with our young people to prepare them for post-secondary education, and to start as early as middle school talking about college and careers and looking ahead. There's a state-funded program called Aspire, and it is designed to work with students from middle school on and finding mentors for every individual student who will help them look to the future, to find out, set goals for what they want to do, and then help them find whatever avenue it takes. What's lacking, I think, that we're really lacking in our schools is in the area of vocational education and the ability. There are students, we through the Minority Health Coalition in the state of Oregon started a certified nursing assistant program where our students can graduate with a high school diploma and a CNA certification at the same time. But we've lost a lot of the vocational training programs that would really help a lot of young people take the next step, and that's a gap. But at least statewide and district-wide in all of our districts, I think we're all focusing more on making sure our kids have that belief in themselves and know that there is a way to go further, and that a high school diploma isn't the end, it's the beginning. And there is more, I think, of a focus on that now than there have been in the past. Hopefully that will help change what we're seeing.
Okay, you make a point about the voc ed piece. I think that's a good piece. And from a historical standpoint, in the Portland metropolitan era, back from there was DeBernardis, Dr. DeBernardis, that basically brought community colleges to the state of Oregon, and he started right here in Northeast Portland. And in doing so, it has been shown that voc ed was taken out of K through 12, taken out of the schools. And then all of a sudden now, there's nothing there. I mean, all of the shops, wood shop, metal shop, all that stuff was basically there. And in many ways, it was really designed for young people, because I was part and parcel of that when I was going to school. For those folks who didn't have parents, if you will, that were educated and maybe this, that, and the other. But the bottom line is that it gave me something that I could do. Because in fact, in all due respect, I went to Dearborn, Michigan, and met with the execs of Ford Motor Company. I won a prize, if you will, and they flew me down there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I spun a chafing dish out of aluminum. And you know, I was in who's who and the whole 9 yards. Got a scholarship at the end of my term. But my point is that was some benefits there. I mean, you had somewhere to go. We don't have that in Portland Public Schools. But it's interesting that outside of Portland Public Schools, they do have, if you will, charter schools in voc ed. It's called the ACE program, and I'm talking about the building industry. It's not AGC, construction, and this, that, and the other. But the Portland Public Schools, I'm familiar with that because we went to Portland Public Schools, and they would not allow the ACE program to be a part of the structure, if you will. And then there was the opposition, not just from, quote, it was across the board, if you will, because I've always maintained that whenever you come up with an idea that can help someone, as long as you come up with your own money, as long as you don't mess with somebody else's money, you're okay. You can be welcome to the table if you got your money. But if you're going to be messing around with something, even though they're not doing it right, if you will, everybody's kind of like protecting their own. Okay, want to throw that piece out to you? Talk to me.
There's a couple ways to look. First of all, I don't think vocational education has gone away. It's been privatized. They have ITT and some of these other schools that have moved into that type of education, and they do so on a private basis. And the reason is because of automation. There's things that you just mentioned, spinning some aluminum into a shaving dish. And a lot of the automation, even a lot of the components of house building now is done with a form of automation that doesn't require as much skilled or unskilled labor. So that's one problem, and the second is the amount of resources that the governments have towards education. Knowing that that's the case, a lot of the schools have chosen to discontinue that type of education because it's duplicated in private schools such as DeVry and ITT and schools like that. From a community standpoint, and a business standpoint, I think that we have fair representation in some vocations. In a lot of vocations, we have much fairer representation of that than we do in the boardrooms, than we do in the corner offices, than we do holding briefcases and going to meetings. And if we're going to talk about that in the context of limited resources, then we need to say, hey, okay, we're going to put a certain amount of money into making sure these kids who are talented, gifted enough, which to me is almost all of them, make it to this level. We can't put a system that says, okay, we give up on you, or we don't think you can make it, so this is going to be available to you irregardless. Vocational education is going to be available to you, because the truth be told, there's just not that many jobs. Most of the manufacturing, and I told you when I went to China, I was surprised when I was playing golf in Hong Kong that I thought it was going to be sunny outside and it would look like the San Francisco fog had rolled in, when in fact what happened was the smog from mainland China had rolled over the top of Hong Kong, and we were out there playing golf with doctors' masks on. But that's where all the manufacturing, the heavy manufacturing that used to be done in the United States is now done in Asia. So I'm not sure that the powers to be view investment in vocational education as dollars well spent at this time.
Okay, on that particular point, I'm agreeing with you on that end of it, but where I was coming from was that the voc ed that I was involved in school gave me more of a motivation, if you will, to understand what algebra was about. You see, algebra, math.
Well, it's needed.
I was motivated, i.e., to be able to articulate English. I could read, if you will. So my point is that like for instance, repairing an engine, if you will, or just basically doing that whole deal. You've got to know tools. You got to have micrometers. You got to know combustions. You got chemistry, on and on and on. So my point, that was an incentive, if you will. So consequently, when I graduated with straight A's. But had I not been involved in that voc ed, Mom and Dad couldn't come to school with me, and in many ways they just could not understand. They couldn't read as well, if you will. So I was dependent upon school in that voc ed piece to put me at that point that I could perform. Okay, go on.
And I would tell you that at Benson, Benson High School was almost a lot of crafts that were geared towards voc ed, but they were done so with an engineering program, and I think that
but that was just Benson. That wasn't the rest of the schools.
Well, just back to scarce resources. They only had money to put that at one school, but what it did for us was when you put that together with lots of math, lots of science, and everything started making sense. And I would agree with you. Now we're on the other side of the curve where, well, we don't need to teach you how to make this table. We just need to teach you the math formula. And that's why a lot of inventions, and I think that's why America has lost its technological edge in a lot of industries, is because we don't understand how to make things with our hands. If you ever want the economy to go bad, is stop making things. For the United States to make it, we have to make something. We can't buy all of our goods, our hard, durable goods from other countries. We have to make something here. And for us to make something here, we have to have technologically savvy young men and women designing something that can be efficient enough to be made here.
Okay.
And I agree. I think the very last thing we would want to do with vocational programs is separate our students and say you can't make it in the world of business or engineering, so we're going to put you in this program. I think that I see a lot of students in an alternative education are hands-on learners, and they do learn the math and the skills by working with their hands. For example, in the CNA program, the idea behind it is there is a real lack of people of color in the health industry. And if you know doctors or registered nurses, they started as a CNA. Sometimes it's a foot in the door. That vocational piece can be a foot in the door. For example, we do have a program that's a private alternative school, Youth Builders, and they spend half their time in education and half their time in construction. But I dare say that some of those students will go on to own their own construction companies. So I think that we have so many different kinds of learners, and you said earlier that you were at the Gang Summit and how bright those kids were. That is the one thing that I have to say adamantly is our young people are very bright. And unfortunately, the majority of students that come into our program might be 14, 15, 16, 17, and reading at the second grade level. We're really lacking at getting the core academics into our schools for everyone so that they do know the basics so they can go on. And I think vocational opportunities would just be another avenue. We need to find avenues that fit the variety of students that we have and things that will garner their interest so that they can learn the basics and move ahead and own their own companies, carry that briefcase to work. And I don't think there's a single... My first program was set up just for gang leaders coming out of McLaren. And there wasn't a school that I could get them in, and we started our first program with 8 young men who were gang members, and we were in a church basement with no equipment. We had library cards and bus passes, and every one of those students wanted an education. I haven't found a young person who doesn't want an education, so I guess it rests with us to find the means to excite them about how they're getting that education and having things that interest them and having schools that they can invest in. Not classrooms with 40 students and a poor teacher that's having 6 classes a day of 40 students. We can't reach all the students that way. So going back to the changes we're making at the state, hope and pray that that makes some difference. But for our children's sake, Martin Luther King said we're free at last. We're not free till we have equality in all aspects. And education, we had full employment in the days of slavery because people of color were all working. They weren't making any money. What did we keep from people of color? during the days of slavery, education. They could work very hard, but they couldn't. They weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to have an education. Are we still doing the same thing? Are we still keeping that education piece harder to get for part of our population? I don't think we've reached. We're not free at last until education is equal across the board.
Well, you know, I liked what you guys said. I will go back, though, in terms of the trades. When you think about it from a historical standpoint, it was the blacks that basically established all of the apprenticeship programs in the trades because they were slaves. They're the one that were doing the work. They established the blue-collar trades, if you will. And then all of a sudden they started making some changes, and there was not a focus anymore. When you start thinking about what a cement maker makes, and when they get vested and how much retirement they're getting, $70,000, $80,000 a year, or making $20 and $30 an hour, or an iron worker making $20 or $30, $40 an hour, why defocus that piece? And I'm not saying no to that end of it, but I'm just saying that's where the bulk of the work, and there's a lack, if you will, of personnel there. And that same point I would make in regards to the whole issue with the criminal justice system. They got a captured environment, if you will, once a person gets in that criminal justice system. While they're in that institution, and remember the time that they all of a sudden they say, well, we're going to teach them apprenticeship and this, that, and the other. Everybody got together in a round table and said, we're going to preach. When they get out, they'll have something that they can, i.e., get a job with, because of the labor unions and et cetera, said, okay, fine, we'll take these people. Okay, they cut the program off. But why can't they, while they got them there? A lot of them that didn't graduate from school because of lack of education. A lot of times get those folks in that criminal justice system. While they're there, sitting at that criminal justice, sitting up there in prison, why can't they get their high school diploma or an associate degree? Why not? I mean, they're saying that we're paying, what, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to incarcerate these folks, sometimes $100,000 a year. It makes better sense to me. You educate them to get out, get a job, they pay taxes, and guess what? Right? Fair note? Okay, another note. What do you think President Obama? What about President Obama? Does he recognize the issue that we have here from what you, from yours?
I think he does. I think he's taken perhaps a different approach than some people voted for him thought he was going to take. I think that I kind of share his vision that given us an economic opportunity to change things is much better than to just write a check. And kind of following up on what Becky has said earlier about the schools, I mean, a good teacher is just worth its weight in gold. I had what I've considered looking back on to be some poor teachers, but the ones that were shining stars, I wouldn't have made it without them. And it wasn't that they had all these great techniques. It's like they took the time to invest the time in believing in my abilities. And it was very difficult in college back then. I'm sure it's difficult now when you have somebody who maybe doesn't come out and say that you can't make it, but you can see it in their body language and the way they treat you that you don't belong. And the key, I think, for education system is not necessarily the bricks on the building or the paint in the classroom. It's the person at the head of the class. Amen. You know, do they believe in their students? Are they going to take the time? And the best teachers I had were not the easy ones. They were the ones who made it very, very tough in the guise of a challenge, though. They challenged me, and they knew how to challenge me, and they knew how to evoke a successful outcome to it.
Okay, Becky, how do you go about getting good teachers?
Well, first I want to say amen to what you just said about a good teacher is worth their weight in gold. Right. That's what it takes. And it takes more than the academic skills. It takes the heart. Right. It takes some real caring, because that is where so many of my students are coming from, is feeling like they they didn't belong and that everybody expected them to fail. And having a teacher who believes in them is so important. Mm-hmm. And in terms of President Obama, you know, you need a 3-hour show for us to cover all these topics.
We're going to do that. You know, so I'm just going to jump. I'm just getting little pieces as I can. In fact, we got about 6 more minutes, and I want to bring something up right now today that we can give back, if you will, to the community, because people are stressing out on this piece. The whole issue with the TriMet situation. I guess, what do you got? How many minutes? We got 2 more minutes, real quick. Like, we got 2 more minutes. Your comments about the issue with the TriMet situation.
I'll let it go.
Good on.
Oh, you're going to let me go? Thanks a lot. I'm probably going to, what do I think about the kids? There have been this past week at least 4 incidents I know of where young people have attacked someone else. And in every one of those cases, some of them made the news and some didn't, but in all of those cases there was a parent involved who pushed the kids for their act of violence. And so in those cases, parents have to be taken to task. Just like teachers have to have a heart, somehow in our schools we have to have teachers with character that are trying to give kids who aren't getting it elsewhere a heart that knows the difference between right and wrong. And something has gone wrong in situations where a parent is either protecting a child who has committed a violent act or who is a part of that violent act. I think we have to look at the parents in those cases, and we have to do all we can for the kids to change their way of thinking. And even if the school is not the place for anything but reading, writing, arithmetic, that's a falsehood. It has to be more than that. We have to be working on helping kids know that they're cared about and having a heart and caring about other people. Character building. And in the TriMet cases, in the TriMet case you're referring to, it's a sad statement, and there were two incidents, the one at the Rose Garden and one out in Gresham, and in both cases there were adults involved. We adults have to take responsibility for the next generation.
Okay. Well, you know what? Look like we've sort of run out of time. What we'll do is that I've always maintained too that Dr. King, you know, as far as Dr. King, they should be every day, especially with the fact that we've got an African American as president right now. We are discussing the issue of race, and I think that's a good thing, if you will. You got me? Mm-hmm. And so if we have problems, we're having problems with kids across the board. We really don't know what base. I want to follow up on that piece because we never know why the family got involved. There's another side of the deal. Is media doing the right job? You know, because in all due respect, we get the communication from media, and are we getting the full story? I mean, the total story. Because at the end of the day, we still want a parent, you know, and at the end of the day, we still want a child. And I think that's a very, very important piece.
Can I add something
Real quick
to that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Martin Luther King had a dream, and I think we all have a dream for a better future for our kids. But a dream is a dream.
Yes.
We have to put our hands to work. We are God's hands. We are the hands that have to do the work. And so we need to all have a dream. And I think we do. But we have to use our hands to make that dream come true.
Good comment. Real quick, last comment?
Good night.
We'll see you again.
Yes, sir.
For sure. Folks, thank you very much for joining us. And as George Page always said, back to what you believe in. See you next week. Take care.